An entire race vanished from Tamriel in a single instant, and every machine they built kept running without them. They didn't die fighting, they were reaching for something beyond mortality itself, terrified of ending the way every other civilization on Nirn eventually does. If an entire people can erase themselves trying to escape reality, something in this world was always worth escaping from. The Dwemer transcended. An entire race vanished in a single second, and they left the lights on. Every automaton still hums, every steam vent still hisses, every clockwork spider still patrols the same tunnel it was patrolling the day its makers disappeared. That's not a ruin. Ruins fall apart. This is a house where everyone left mid-sentence and the kettle never stopped boiling. The official story is straightforward enough. During the Battle of Red Mountain on Vardenfell, the Dwemer's chief tonal architect, Kagranak, used his tools on the heart of Lorkhan. Whatever he did, it worked instantly. Every single Dwemer on Nirn, thousands of them, gone in one moment, with 0 bodies and 0 survivors. 0, except for one. His name is Yagrum Bagarn, and Morrowind calls him the last living Dwemer for a reason. He wasn't standing in Tamriel when it happened. He was somewhere else entirely, caught in a different plane of reality when his entire species got erased from this one. Think about what that actually means. The one Dwemer who lived is the one Dwemer who happened to be standing outside the room when the room disappeared. That is not a coincidence you can shrug off. The obvious read is that Kagranak's experiment went catastrophically wrong, that he tried to weaponize a god's heart and it killed everyone holding the tools, but the surviving dwarven ruins tell a different story. This wasn't a people caught off guard. This was the most advanced civilization Tamriel ever produced, a race that had already been bending souls and rewriting tonal architecture for centuries, standing at the edge of their greatest experiment on purpose. Some lore historians think the goal was never destruction at all. They think Kagranak wasn't trying to win the battle. He was trying to graduate his entire species out of mortality, using the heart to lift every Dwemer past the line separating gods from mortals into something that doesn't die and doesn't need a body to exist. Nothing in canon confirms that outright, but follow the pattern. A species obsessed with soul mechanics, a weapon built from a god's heart, and an exit that happened to work on everyone in the room at once. Died or graduated. Ask yourself which one leaves the machines running. But you don't need a whole race and a god machine to pull off an escape like that. Sometimes it only takes one mortal walking into the wrong Daedric realm and walking out wearing a god's face. And unlike the Deep Elves, this one remembers exactly who he used to be. The Greymarch Curse. The friendliest Daedric prince you will ever meet is a mortal man wearing a god's identity like a coat he can never take off again. That is not a metaphor. That is the plain reading of what happens in Shivering Isles, and it gets stranger the closer you look. Jyggalag was the Daedric Prince of Order, and the other princes hated him for it so much they cursed him. At the end of every era, forever, he transforms into Sheogorath, Prince of Madness, in a repeating cataclysm called the Greymarch. Order gets erased and replaced with chaos on a timer, over and over, with zero say in the matter. The hero of Kvatch shows up, fights through the Isles, and helps Jyggalag finally face down his own curse in one last battle. He wins. He is free. And then somebody has to become Sheogorath anyway. The hero of Kvatch mantles him, takes the identity, the title, the role, the whole madness-shaped job description. One mortal walks into a realm as a nobody and walks out wearing a god's name for good. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. Here is the detail that turns this from a neat ending into something colder. In Skyrim, Sheogorath talks about events from Oblivion like he was there. He references the hero of Kvatch directly, with the specific texture of someone recalling their own memory, not reciting history. A Daedric prince, older than mortal comprehension, casually name-drops his own former life because it is still in his head. That is not flavor text. That is confirmation mantling actually works. That a person can become a god and keep the lights on inside, so a mortal wanted out of being nothing, the same hunger that drives every escape artist in this universe, and he got it. He became one of the most powerful beings in existence, and Jyggalag himself confirms the Greymarch is finished, the cycle broken for good the moment that final battle ended. No more resets, no more forced transformation, waiting at the edge of the next era. Nothing in canon says the punishment continues, but follow the shape of what is left behind anyway. The curse is over. The role is not. Somebody still has to be Sheogorath forever, because breaking the cycle didn't empty the throne, it just made the current occupant permanent. Which means the hero of Kvatch didn't escape anything by winning. He traded a war he could eventually end for a job with no end date. A mortal soul running an immortal identity for the rest of existence, laughing the whole time because madness is the job. so a mortal can climb into a god's identity and get stuck there, curse or no curse. But what if that trick was never new? What if the most worshipped human in all of history did the exact same thing on a far bigger stage and rewrote reality so nobody would ever know he was just a man? Tiber was Talos. Somewhere in the Imperial City, there is a temple where people pray to a warlord. They just do not know it yet because the Empire spent centuries making sure the man and the god look like two different beings. Talos is the ninth divine, worshipped across Tamriel as the god of war, governance, and mankind's ambition. Officially, he is a distinct entity, a divine who watches over the empire he helped build. Unofficially, Imperial religion admits the truth outright. Talos is Tiber Septim, the mortal general who conquered an entire continent, and upon his death he did not go to some afterlife. He became a god. That alone would be a strange enough claim for state religion to make about its own founder. But it gets messier. Some texts fold two more men into the same identity, Hjalti Earlybeard and the mage Zurin Arctus, suggesting Talos is not one soul wearing a crown, but three lives fused into a single divine signature. Fans call it the Oversoul. The Empire just calls it Talos, and leaves the details vague on purpose. Here is the detail that turns a theological footnote into the scariest idea in the setting. Tiber Septim did not simply earn godhood through conquest. He did it with a machine. That machine is the Numidium, a god-sized construct so powerful that every time it activated, it did not just win battles, it fractured time itself. These fractures are called dragon breaks, moments where history splits into multiple versions that all happened at once, and none of them cancel each other out. Tamriel does not pick one timeline and discard the rest. It keeps all of them, contradictions included. Mortals who touch that kind of power do not just change their future. Through concepts like mantling and chim, a being can assume a god's identity so completely that the identity stops being a costume and becomes a fact. The boldest reading of Tiber Septim's ascension says he did not wait around to become divine after the Numidium fired. The dragon breaks it triggered reached backward, and Talos was no longer something Tiber achieved. He was something Tiber had always been, stitched into every past version of history simultaneously. Nothing in canon spells this part out directly, but follow where the metaphysics point. If dragon breaks make every resulting timeline equally true, then a man who becomes a god during one of them was never promoted. He was rewritten into every timeline that came before the promotion, which means you cannot disprove Talos by finding the man underneath. The timeline itself has already agreed he was never just a man to begin with. An emperor who was terrified of dying like everyone else found a way to make his own past divine, and in doing so, made himself impossible to erase. Now imagine a faction that studied exactly how that man rewrote reality, and instead of wanting to become a god, they decided the smarter move was to tear out the pillars holding reality up one by one, until time itself simply stops. They end time. The Aldmeri Dominion does not want to conquer the world. It wants there to be no world left to conquer. That sounds like hyperbole until you look at what the Thalmor actually spend their time doing. They are not just hunting rebels or expanding borders. They are hunting Talos, and only Talos with a specific, obsessive, almost bureaucratic hatred that makes zero sense if this is just racism with an army attached. The White Gold Concordat did not simply outlaw a religion. It stripped Talos worship from every corner of Tamriel under threat of death, and that only makes sense once you remember what the last section just proved. Talos is not a folk hero who got promoted. He is a tower, a load-bearing structure that anchors mortal linear time onto Nirn itself. Ban the worship, starve the belief, and you are not silencing a cult. You are pulling a support beam out of reality while everyone else is still arguing about the politics of it. And the Thalmor keep circling the same targets over and over like they are working down a checklist. In-universe texts document their obsession with Meridia's realm, a plane defined by its violent rejection of normal death and decay. They document experiments touching on dawn itself, the very first sunrise, the exact moment linear time began. They orchestrated the Great War, an event that reads like a border conflict but functions like a controlled demolition, aimed less at Cyrodiil's armies and more at the metaphysical scaffolding sitting underneath the Imperial City. Add it all up and the pattern stops looking like conquest entirely. White Gold Tower, the Adamantine Tower, Talos as a human stone, Meridia's anti-death domain. These are not scattered curiosities the Thalmor happen to poke at whenever they get bored. They are the pillars holding time itself in a straight line, and the Thalmor keep showing up at every single one of them with a crowbar. Nothing in canon has the Thalmor stand up and announce the plan outright, so call this the leap, knock out enough towers, and linear time does not just weaken, it stops. Existence snaps back to an unchanging, elf-dominated era before Lorcan ever tricked anyone into becoming mortal in the first place. After that leap, everything else clicks into place at full confidence, because an organization willing to genocide a religion over a few hundred years of theology was never doing this for tax revenue. Somewhere in that ideology is an entire people terrified of their own irrelevance, so terrified they are willing to unmake every mortal life on Nirn just so their version of forever gets to be the only one that counts. That is the trade being offered, not power, deletion dressed up as purity, but to unravel time, you would have to be sure time runs in a straight line at all, and there is a theory that says it might not. The same soul keeps coming back to save this world over and over, a hero who has died and returned so many times that even he does not know he is on a loop. Hero of Kvatch. You never picked your destiny in Oblivion. You inherited it from a corpse. The game hands you two titles like party favors, Hero of Kvatch and Champion of Cyrodiil, and it feels like an achievement. It is not an achievement. It is a job posting that keeps getting refilled, and you just happen to be standing in the prison cell when the last applicant died. Start with the obvious part. A nameless prisoner walks out of the Imperial sewers, closes a city-ending portal, and gets crowned with titles that sound personal, but function as slots. The game never asks who you were before the cell, it only cares what role you're about to wear. That alone is a little unsettling, but the real gut punch comes later, in Shivering Isles, when the accepted reading of your character's ending is that they stop being a person entirely and mantle Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness. Skyrim's own dialogue backs this up. Your protagonist's final documented act is not retirement. It is becoming a god by erasing the self that got them there. This is not a one-off. Nerevar comes back wearing the mask of the Nerevarine. Pelinal Whitestrake echoes through later heroes like a template being reused. The Dragonborn slots into a role the Nords were narrating long before anyone in Skyrim ever drew a sword. Every era, the same shape shows up wearing a new face, and the pattern is doing the work, not the person inside it. Nothing in canon says, the Champion of Cyrodiil is literally a recycled soul, but follow the pattern far enough and it stops looking like coincidence. Picture a single soul assigned to Cyrodiil's survival, dying, failing, or simply expiring after each crisis, then getting reissued into a new body the moment the Empire needs saving again, until it finally earns enough narrative weight to graduate out of the cycle altogether by becoming Sheogorath. That is not a hero's journey, that is a subscription service for saviors, and you were never the founding member, feel that for a second. Somewhere back in Cyrodiil, an emperor's entire bloodline gets slaughtered, so this machine can justify pulling a new champion out of a cell, and nobody mourns the last one, because the last one was never named either. Free will was never on the table. The role picked the body, wore it out, and moved on. But if a hero can be reborn to fight the same war forever, then so can the thing he's fighting. And there's a monster whose entire job is to end the world, who may have already succeeded more times than anyone left alive could count. Alduin already won. You did not beat Alduin in Skyrim. You interrupted his schedule. That sounds like a joke. It is not. Alduin is not a dragon with anger issues who happened to show up at Helgen. He is the World Eater, a title the game hands you like. It is flavor text when it is actually a job description. His entire function in Elder Scrolls cosmology is to end everything, and then let it start over. That is not a metaphor. That is the mechanism. Look at how casually the story treats his return. Alduin is not new. He is pulled back into Skyrim's timeline early, yanked out of whatever cycle he was supposed to finish, because someone with a plan needed him back on schedule. A god does not get an early meeting unless the calendar he is running on is bigger than one kingdom, one empire, one dragonborn. Then Blackreach happens, and things get worse. Deep under the surface, Dwemer ruins connected to time experiments in the online era brush up against something ancient, something draconic, something that should not be down there bleeding through the rock. Theory circles read this as Alduin leaking across timelines he is not even supposed to be visiting yet. Not a monster in a cave. A constant showing up early to a party that has not started. Here is the part that turns a boss fight into a body count. The universe itself runs on Kalpas, full cycles of creation and total annihilation, and Alduin's entire identity is welded to that cycle ending. World Eater is not a nickname he earned once. It is a role he has already performed in full more than one time. Nothing in the games says outright that he has already destroyed prior worlds, but follow what his own title is doing. You do not get called the World Eater for a first offense. So when you drive your sword through him on that mountain and the credits roll, you are not closing a story. You are postponing an outcome that has already happened before somewhere. To someone exactly as convinced as you were that it was finally over, every person who ever begged the Nine for one more day, every soldier who bled out defending a hold that felt permanent, all of it gets quietly reclassified as a delay, not a rescue. And that is the part that should ruin the ending for you. We already found out the hero might be a rerun, wearing a different face every time reality needs saving. Now the thing trying to erase reality is a rerun too. Same fight, different stage, same two names, cast in the leads every single time the curtain goes up. And if a single world has ended and begun again more than once, then maybe the games we've been playing this whole time aren't chapters of one story, but glimpses of entirely separate worlds that only look like they're connected. Every game, another Kalpa. The Elder Scrolls has a word for the end of the world, and the series has already used it more times than most fans realize. That word is Kalpa. It means a full cycle of creation and destruction, and once you know the term, you start noticing that every single mainline game is quietly built around the same event: a reality-level crisis, a god machine, a Daedric invasion, a moment where time itself stops behaving. Arena ends with a plane-hopping sorcerer trying to become a god. Daggerfall ends with time breaking so badly that historians just gave up. Morrowind centers on a god machine that can rewrite flesh and fate. Oblivion is Daedra pouring through literal tears in reality. Skyrim is a dragon that eats time itself. Every game, another apocalypse wearing a different mask. Daggerfall is where this stops being a pattern and becomes a confession. Its ending doesn't pick one outcome. It keeps 6 of them, all mutually exclusive, and declares every single one canon at the same time. That's not a writing error the developers forgot to clean up. That's the games telling you directly that continuity here was never meant to be one straight line. Lore theorists have a phrase for what's really going on underneath all of this. The series isn't secretly about the scrolls, it's about the towers. Every game shows a different tower under different stress, bending, cracking, or barely holding a version of the world together. Line them up, and they start to look like stages of the same collapse, repeating with new names stitched on top. Nothing in canon states outright that each numbered game is its own separate cycle, but follow the pattern anyway. A Dragon Break already proved the timeline can shatter and keep every fragment alive at once. A tower failure already proved a whole plane of reality can buckle and get rebuilt. Put those two facts next to 8 games that each end in collapse, and the retcons stop looking like mistakes. They start looking like seams, the exact spots where one Kalpa ends, and the next one boots up wearing familiar faces. That reframes every hero this video has already covered. The Dwemer didn't just vanish chasing godhood, they may have detonated one entire cycle trying to escape it. Every emperor, every cursed prince, every desperate racial exodus we've walked through wasn't struggling inside one continuous world. Each of them might have been fighting the last few minutes of their own private universe, never knowing it was already ending, never getting to find out if anything they saved actually survived into whatever came next. If that's true, the comforting version of this franchise, the one where it's all just one long story, quietly stops making sense. Each game is stranded in its own dying reality, but something still has to be doing the resetting, something all of these cycles are happening inside of, and there's one last theory that says the whole universe, every game, every Kalpa, every hero and monster is happening inside a single mind that doesn't know it's asleep. The Godhead Loop Theory. Every theory in this video has the same ending, and nobody noticed because the ending doesn't look like an ending, it looks like a dream. Strip away the names. The Dwemer vanished by editing the rules. Vivec mantled a dead god and kept the throne warm with a lie. The Underking rewrote his own history and got erased for it. The Thalmor are trying to delete a species from the record. Every single one of these is the same move wearing a different costume, someone inside the world realizing the world has an edit button. Here's the part nobody wants to hear. Tamriel itself is written in supplementary texts and developer-adjacent lore as a single dream belonging to something called the Godhead. Not a god ruling from above, a dreamer. And everything in Nirn, every war, every empire, every extinction, is happening inside its sleep. When a Kalpa ends, when reality collapses under its own weight, the dreamer doesn't die. It just dreams again. Same themes, same archetypes, same tragic figures, running the loop one more time with the numbers filed off. Nothing in the games states outright that Talos or Vivek knew they were characters, but follow the pattern all the way to the end and it stops looking optional. Chi-Chayam is the state where a mind inside the dream wakes up just enough to recognize it's inside a dream, without collapsing into the zero sum that erases everyone who looks too hard. Achieve that, and you're not a subject of reality anymore. You're a co-author of it. That is what Vivek was doing on the Clockwork City. That's what the Underking pulled off before the Thalmor scrubbed him out. That's the trick the Dwemer were reaching for right before they vanished, whether they landed it or got swallowed trying. Every hero and villain in this franchise is terrified of the same thing, becoming nothing, forgotten, deleted, and the horrible joke is that winning doesn't fix it. The more of them who escape mortality, the less solid the thing they saved actually becomes. An empire, a race, a throne, none of it is safe, because none of it was ever real in the way they thought. So who's holding the wheel on Nirn? Nobody. There was never a wheel, just a sleeper, and a long exhausted line of mortals who figured out the floor was fake and grabbed for a pen instead of falling. That's why every escape in this series works the same way, and it's why none of them ever feels finished. The universe was never ruled. It's haunted by every single person who woke up inside it and decided that was enough to start rewriting the story instead of waiting for someone else to end it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now